Jewish prayer are the prayer recitations and Jewish meditation traditions that form part of the observance of Rabbinic Judaism. These prayers, often with instructions and commentary, are found in the Siddur, the traditional Jewish prayer book. In general, Jewish men are obligated to pray 3 times a day within specific time ranges, while, according to tradition, women are only required to pray once daily, as they are generally exempted from obligations that are time-dependent. Traditionally, 3 prayer services are recited daily. Shacharit or Shaharit, from the Hebrew Shachar or Shahar, morning light. Minha or Minna, the afternoon prayers named for the flower offering that accompanied sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem. Arvit or Mariv, from nightfall. Additional prayers. Musaf are recited by Orthodox and conservative congregations on Shabbat, major Jewish holidays, and Rosh Chodesh. A 5th prayer service, Nila, is recited only on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. According to the Talmud, prayer is a biblical commandment, and the Talmud Bavli gives 2 reasons why there are 3 basic prayers: to recall the daily sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem, and, or because each of the patriarchs instituted 1 prayer: Abraham the morning, Isaac the afternoon, and Jacob the evening. The Talmud Yerushalmi states that the anti-Knesset Haggadah learned and understood the beneficial concept of regular daily prayer from personal habits of the forefathers as hinted in the Tanakh, and instituted the 3 daily prayers. A distinction is made between individual prayer and communal prayer, which requires a quorum known as a minyan, with communal prayer being preferable as it permits the inclusion of prayers that otherwise must be omitted. Maimonides relates that until the Babylonian exile, all Jews composed their own prayers, but thereafter the sages of the Great Assembly composed the main portions of the Siddur. Modern scholarship dating from the Wissenschaft des Judentums movement of 19th century Germany, as well as textual analysis influenced by the 20th century discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggests that dating from this period there existed liturgical formulations of a communal nature designated for particular occasions and conducted, in a center totally independent of Jerusalem and the Temple, making use of terminology and theological concepts that were later to become dominant in Jewish and, in some cases, Christian prayer. The language of the prayers, while clearly from the Second Temple period, often employs biblical idiom. Jewish prayer books emerged during the early Middle Ages during the period of the Geonim of Babylonia. Over the last 2,000 years, variations have emerged among the traditional liturgical customs of different Jewish communities, such as Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Yemenite, Hasidic, and others. However, the differences are minor compared with the commonalities. Most of the Jewish liturgy is sung or chanted with traditional melodies or trope. Synagogues may designate or employ a professional or lay hazan for the purpose of leading the congregation in prayer, especially on Shabbat or holidays. Origin and history of Jewish prayer. Biblical origin. According to the Talmud Bavli, prayer is a biblical command. You shall serve God with your whole heart. What service is performed with the heart? This is prayer. The prayers are therefore referred to as avodas shibboleth. The noted Rabbi Maimonides likewise categorizes prayer as a biblical command of written law, as the Babylon Talmud says. However, corresponding with the Jerusalem Talmud, the Rambam did hold that the number of prayers and their times are not a biblical command of written law, and that the forefathers did not institute such a takanah. Rather, it was a rabbinical command based on a takanah of the anti-Knesset Haggadah. Babylon Talmud. The oral law, according to the Talmud Bavli, gives 2 reasons why there are 3 basic prayers. According to Rabbi Jose B. Hanuna, each of the patriarchs instituted 1 prayer: Abraham the morning, Isaac the afternoon, and Jacob the evening prayers. This view is supported with biblical quotes indicating that the patriarchs prayed at the times mentioned. However, even according to this view, the exact times of when the services are held, and moreover the entire concept of a Musaf service, are still based on the sacrifices. Each service was instituted parallel to a sacrificial act in the temple in Jerusalem. The morning Tamid offering, the afternoon Tamid, and the overnight burning of this last offering. Jerusalem Talmud. The oral Torah, according to the Talmud Yerushalmi, states why there are three basic prayers and who instituted them. Rabbi Yehoshua said that the anti-Knesset Haggadah learned and understood the beneficial concept of regular daily prayers from the habit of the forefathers Abraham, Isaac and Yaakov. Therefore, the anti-Knesset Haggadah based their takana that Jewish men were required to pray 3 times a day, from hints to personal habits of the forefathers in the Tanakh. Additional references in the Hebrew Bible have been interpreted to suggest that King David and the prophet Daniel prayed 3 times a day. In Psalms, David states, "Evening, morning, and noontime, I speak and moan, and he hearkened to my voice." Psalm chapter 55 verse 18, as in the book of Daniel. And Daniel, when he knew that a writ had been inscribed, came to his house, where there were open windows in his upper chamber, opposite Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he kneeled on his knees and prayed and offered thanks before his God, just as he had done prior to this. Daniel chapter 6 verse 11. Orthodox, Modern Orthodox and Sephardic strands of observant Judaism regard Halakha as requiring Jewish men to pray 3 times daily and 4 times daily on the Sabbath and most Jewish holidays, and 5 times on Yom Kippur. Some observant Jewish women regard the system of multiple daily prayer services as optional for them due to a need to be constantly taking care of small children, but, in accordance with Halakha, still pray at least daily, without a specific time requirement. Moreover, it is generally accepted by observant, i.e., Orthodox, Modern Orthodox and Sephardic, religious authorities that women are exempt from the evening prayer. The conservative Judaism regards the halakhic system of multiple daily services as mandatory. Since 2002, Jewish women from conservative Reform congregations have been regarded as having undertaken a communal obligation to pray the same prayers at the same times as men, with traditional communities and individual women permitted to opt out. Reform and Reconstructionist congregations do not regard halakha as binding and hence regard appropriate prayer times as matters of personal, spiritual decision rather than a matter of religious requirement. Text and language. According to halakha, all individual prayers and virtually all communal prayers may be said in any language that the person praying understands. For example, the Mishnah mentions that the Shema need not be said in Hebrew. A list of prayers that must be said in Hebrew is given in the Mishnah, and among these only the priestly blessing is in use today, as the others are prayers that are to be said only in a temple in Jerusalem, by a priest, or by a reigning king. Despite this, the tradition of most Ashkenazi Orthodox synagogues is to use Hebrew for all except a small number of prayers, including the Kaddish, which had always been in Aramaic, and sermons and instructions, for which the local language is used. In other streams of Judaism there is considerable variability. Sephardic communities may use Ladino or Portuguese for many prayers. Conservative synagogues tend to use the local language to a varying degree, and, at some Reform synagogues, almost the whole service may be in the local language. Maimonides relates that until the Babylonian exile, all Jews composed their own prayers. After the exile, however, the sages of the time found the ability of the people insufficient to continue the practice, and they composed the main portions of the Siddur, such as the Amidah. The origins of modern Jewish prayer were established during the period of the Tannaim, from their traditions, later committed to writing. We learn that the generation of rabbis active at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple gave Jewish prayer its structure and, in outline form at least, its contents. This liturgy included the twice-daily recitation of the Shema, the Amidah, or Shmoneh Esrei, including 18 blessings recited several times daily, and the public recitation of the Torah in installments. The oldest prayer books date from the time of the Geonim of Babylonia. Some were composed by respected rabbinic scholars at the request of far-flung communities seeking an authoritative text of the required prayers for daily use, Shabbat, and holidays. The language of the prayers, while clearly being from the Second Temple period, often employs biblical idiom, and according to some authorities it should not contain rabbinic or Mishnah each idiom apart from in the sections of Mishnah that are featured. Over the last 2,000 years, the various branches of Judaism have resulted in small variations in the rabbinic liturgy customs among different Jewish communities, with each community having a slightly different usage. The principal difference is between Ashkenazic and Sephardic customs, although there are other communities, and Hasidic and other communities also have distinct customs, variations, and special prayers. The differences are quite minor compared with the commonalities. The Siddur. The earliest parts of Jewish prayer are the Shema Yisrael, and the priestly blessing, which are in the Torah. A set of 18 blessings called the Shemini Esreh or the Amidah, is traditionally ascribed to the Great Assembly in the time of Ezra, at the end of the biblical period. The name Shemini Esreh, literally 18, is an historical anachronism, since it now contains 19 blessings. It was only near the end of the Second Temple period that the 18 prayers of the weekday Amidah became standardized. Even at that time their precise wording and order was not yet fixed, and varied from locale to locale. It was not until several centuries later that the prayers began to be formally fixed. By the Middle Ages the texts of the prayers were nearly fixed, and in the form in which they are still used today. The Siddur was printed by Soncino in Italy as early as 1486, though a Siddur was first mass-distributed only in 1865. The Siddur began appearing in the vernacular as early as 1538. The first English translation, by Gamaliel ben Pedizur, appeared in London in 1738. A different translation was released in the United States in 1837. Readings from the Torah and the Nevi'im form part of the prayer services. To this framework various Jewish sages added, from time to time, various prayers, and, for festivals especially, numerous hymns. The earliest existing codification of the prayer book was drawn up by Rav Amram Gaon of Sura, Babylon, about 850 CE. Half a century later Rav Sadia Gaon, also of Sura, composed a Siddur, in which the rubrical matter is in Arabic. These were the basis of Simcha ben Samuel's Maxor Vitri, which was based on the ideas of his teacher, Rashi. Another formulation of the prayers was that appended by Maimonides to the laws of prayer in his Mishneh Torah. This forms the basis of the Yemenite liturgy, and has had some influence on other rites. From this point forward all Jewish prayer books had the same basic order and contents. Denominational variations. Conservative services generally use the same basic format for services as in Orthodox Judaism, with some doctrinal leniencies and some prayers in English. In practice there is wide variation among conservative congregations. In traditionalist congregations the liturgy can be almost identical to that of Orthodox Judaism, almost entirely in Hebrew, with a few minor exceptions, including excision of a study session on temple sacrifices, and modifications of prayers for the restoration of the sacrificial system. In more liberal conservative synagogues there are greater changes to the service, with up to a third of the service in English, abbreviation or omission of many of the preparatory prayers, and replacement of some traditional prayers with more contemporary forms. There are some changes for doctrinal reasons, including egalitarian language, fewer references to restoring sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem, and an option to eliminate special roles for Kohanim and Levites. The liturgies of Reform and Reconstructionist are based on traditional elements, but contains language more reflective of liberal belief than the traditional liturgy. Doctrinal revisions generally include revising or omitting references to traditional doctrines such as bodily resurrection, a personal Jewish Messiah, and other elements of traditional Jewish eschatology, divine revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai, angels, conceptions of reward and punishment, and other personal miraculous and supernatural elements. Services are often from 40% to 90% in the vernacular. Reform Judaism has made greater alterations to the traditional service in accord with its more liberal theology, including dropping references to traditional elements of Jewish eschatology such as a personal Messiah, a bodily resurrection of the dead, and others. The Hebrew portion of the service is substantially abbreviated and modernized, and modern prayers substituted for traditional ones. In addition, in keeping with their view that the laws of Shabbat are inapplicable to modern circumstances, Reform services often play instrumental or recorded music with prayers on the Jewish Sabbath. All Reform synagogues are egalitarian with respect to gender roles. Philosophy of prayer. In Jewish philosophy and in rabbinic literature, it is noted that the Hebrew verb for prayer, hitpalel, is in fact the reflexive form of palel, to judge. Thus, to pray conveys the notion of judging oneself. Ultimately, the purpose of prayer, tefillah, is to transform ourselves. This etymology is consistent with the Jewish conception of divine simplicity. It is not God that changes through our prayer. Man does not influence God as a defendant influences a human judge who has emotions and is subject to change. Rather, it is man himself who is changed. It is further consistent with Maimonides' view on divine providence. Here, tefillah is the medium which God gave to man by means of which he can change himself, and thereby establish a new relationship with God, and thus a new destiny for himself in life. See also under Psalms. The rationalist approach in this view. Ultimate goal of prayer is to help train a person to focus on divinity through philosophy and intellectual contemplation. This approach was taken by Maimonides and the other medieval rationalists. The educational approach in this view, prayer is not a conversation. Rather, it is meant to inculcate certain attitudes in the one who prays, but not to influence. This has been the approach of Rabbanu Batya, Yehuda Halevi, Joseph Albo, Samson Raphael Hirsch, and Joseph Dov Soloveitchik. This view is expressed by Rabbi Nosson Sherman in the overview to the Art Scroll Siddur. Note that Sherman goes on to also affirm the Kabbalistic view. Kabbalistic view. Kabbalah uses a series of kavanot, directions of intent, to specify the path the prayer ascends in the dialogue with God, to increase its chances of being answered favorably. Kabbalism ascribes a higher meaning to the purpose of prayer, which is no less than affecting the very fabric of reality itself, restructuring and repairing the universe in a real fashion. In this view, every word of every prayer, and indeed, even every letter of every word, has a precise meaning and a precise effect. Prayers thus literally affect the mystical forces of the universe, and repair the fabric of creation. This approach has been taken by the Chassidei Ashkenaz, the Zohar, the Arizal's Kabbalist tradition, the Ramchal, most of Hasidism, the Vilna Gaon and Jacob Emden.